7 spine-chilling cases of sinister figures hidden within the walls, unexplained secrets revealed. In every neighborhood, there are stories, but in Maple Brook, those stories echo with terrifying whispers. Sarah thought the aging house was a fresh start for her and her children, Jake and Lily. Little did she know, the walls held secrets that clawed at the threshold of her sanity. Pine trees loomed like silent spectators, their twisted shadows revealing nothing but dread. Night after night, faint voices stirred her from sleep, a chilling chorus of whispers beckoning her to listen, to look deeper into the fading walls. It sounded like 1,000 secrets shivered in unison, vibrating through her bones, drowning her in fear. The scratching, oh, the scratching. Each sound like nails on the blackboard of her mind. It crept closer, inch by inch, sinister and relentless. As her exhaustion thickened around her, Sarah fought the urge to crumble. She would dismiss these strange occurrences as mere fatigue, the product of her long shifts at the hospital. Yet, how could she ignore the unease that crawled through her veins when the shadows converged? One night, clutching her quilt as if it could shield her from the unseen horrors, she dared to follow the whispers into a dark hallway. The very air turned cold, and her heart thundered, the scratching rhythmic and almost mocking. Just as she steeled her resolve, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye, a fleeting flicker that vanished the moment she turned. Days passed, and her children began exploring their overgrown backyard. Heedless of danger, they unearthed secrets buried beneath layers of dirt, old photographs that captured fleeting smiles and a rusted key, its purpose long forgotten. But it was the doll, weathered and cracked, that drew them in. Jake swore it smiled at him, while Lily squealed in delight. But to Sarah, its glassy eyes held an unsettling glimmer, watching her with a feeling of knowing. Panic simmered just below her surface. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue, but the more Sarah tried to ignore what was happening, the more it clawed at her sanity. Neighbors were evasive when she asked about Mr. Thompson, the charming man who supposedly went missing. Their curious glances turned cold. Even a police officer seemed weary of her escalating fears, as if her concern was a stain on the dark canvas of Maple Brook. The whispers now seemed to mock her resolve, a dark lullaby that twisted her thoughts, taunting her, reminding her of her own family's past, a legacy shrouded in shadows that she had hoped to escape. One fateful night, while the children dreamt innocently, she made the connection. The echoes of laughter intertwined with her racing heart, as a figure materialized in the corner of the room. It defied logic, standing still yet emanating an unspeakable hunger for something, maybe her. Terror fizzled in her veins as the air grew thick, the whispers crescendoing, promising darkness. Every choice she made to keep her children safe spiraled into something malevolent. The walls had secrets, and they were not done with her yet. The night dragged on, stretching into a sinister vortex where shadows danced and the air thickened with fear. Sarah lay in bed, every heartbeat echoing in her ears like an ominous drum. The walls surrounding her didn't just creak, they whispered, their murmurs weaving a sinister tapestry that ensnared her mind. The faint scratching from within the same claws that scraped across her sanity grew bolder, a hopeless song of dread that urged her closer to the edge of insanity. She turned to the children, sound asleep under their quilted fort of innocence, their breaths soft and unaware of the nightmare looming just beyond the veil. What if this was the last night of peace they would ever have? Panic gnawed at her, she had to act. Gathering her last slivers of courage, Sarah slipped out of bed, the cold wooden floor biting at her feet. She tiptoed through the dim corridors, where the air felt charged, electric with impending doom. With each step, she recalled the rusted key hidden in the backyard, the eerie doll, and the fading photographs. Resolved, she followed the whispers that beckoned her toward the basement. Something primal told her that the true horror lay beneath the surface, hidden in darkness. Maybe she'd find answers, or perhaps she'd unearth even more horrors. Open doors yawned as she approached, the basement stairs sloping downward, dark and predatory. Her heart raced, thumping a desperate beat. She grasped the metal railing, cold and slick under her trembling fingers. With every creak of the stairs and each whispered call, the walls closed in, and her resolve wavered. In that moment, Sarah understood fear was not just an emotion, it was a living, breathing entity in Maple Brook. As she reached the bottom, the sudden silence engulfed her. No whispers. No scratching. Just the suffocating darkness, absorbing her fear like a sponge. Sarah flicked the switch, and a harsh light sputtered to life, illuminating the crumbling walls stained with dampness and age, the air thick with mildew and secrets. In the corner, an old trunk begged for attention, its rusty hinges rusted but still shut tight. The whispers returned, a low hum that seemed to murmur just out of comprehension. Against her better judgment, she approached it, her heart pounding like a war drum. Glancing back toward the stairs, she hesitated. A tingle of dread trickled down her spine. But she couldn't turn back now. With a shove, she opened the trunk, and a gust of stale air shot out, wrapping around her like icy fingers. Inside lay remnants of a life long past, tattered clothes, a crumpled diary, and a collection of dusty toys, each one emanating a sense of longing and sorrow. But it was the last item that caught her breath, a cracked mirror, its surface marred but still reflecting shards of light. As she peered closer, the reflection warped to an image of Jake and Lily standing behind her, staring with hollow eyes. Her heart dropped. They weren't there, they were upstairs, tucked away in their beds. Suddenly, the whispers surged, drowning out her thoughts, twisting around her head like a noxious fog. "Help us!" Panic surged through her, and she stumbled back. The basement door slammed shut, locking her in as the darkness thickened, consuming her and revealing a sinister truth: the house was alive, and it wanted her children. In that moment, Sarah's fears crystallized. The whispers were not just echoes from the walls, they were a warning. Something worse than she could imagine lurked in the dark, and she had unwittingly awakened it. It was no longer just the walls that held secrets, it was the whole house, and she had to uncover every dark puzzle before it was too late. What would she sacrifice to save her children from the hungry shadows? In the stillness, something shifted, a presence drew closer, hungry and waiting. The diary began to stir, pages ruffling as if caught in a gust of wind, beckoning her to read, to learn the history that could spell doom for them all. Could she face the truth of Maple Brook, or would she lose everything in the darkness? A single reflection glimmered in the cracked mirror, that hint of dread reminding her time was running out. Her hands shook as she reached for the diary, the leather cracked and faded as if it had witnessed too much horror. The whispers swirled around her, urging her to open it. Fear clawed at her throat, but she knew she had to understand what had happened here. The desperate yanking of pages seemed to punctuate the quiet with heartbeat-like thuds. The first entries were shaky, scribbled in a frantic hand. They talked of a family, an echo of her own, a mother and her 2 children. As she read, a chill settled in her bones, the parallels were striking. Descriptions of laughter and playtime turned into dark warnings about the house's true nature. The mother wrote of shadows that crept, of a terror that slumbered beneath the floorboards. It was a haunting account, each word soaked in dread. "Don't play in the basement," one line bled through her consciousness like ink from the page. It was the same command that resonated in her own head, words that had slipped from her own lips to her children countless times. History was repeating itself, and she was trapped in the same perilous loop. The room around her felt alive, the very walls breathing alongside her racing heart. The air grew thick with despair, as if the basement were absorbing her fear, ready to use it against her. A scraping sound resumed, louder now, digging deeper into her sanity. It was closer, insistent, like a predator closing in on its prey. She could no longer remain an observer, she had to act. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to continue reading. She needed to know. The diary revealed the family's final days, filled with paranoia and despair. The children started to disappear, claimed by the shadows that lurked in the corners, ever hungry. The mother's words devolved into frantic chants, desperate attempts to ward off the dark, yet each entry ended with a chilling realization: I could not protect them. The penultimate page held a drawing chaotic sketches of dark figures looming over silhouettes that could only be children. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. With wide eyes, she traced the malicious faces, the malevolence etched into every line. Could it really be true? Had the house consumed them, taken them to feed its insatiable hunger? Her grip on the diary tightened as she processed the implications of what she was learning. Suddenly, behind her, the cold gust of air surged again, carrying with it a cacophony of whispers that crescendoed into shrill cries. Help us! The sound was unmistakable, echoing like a scream lingering in the stillness. They were calling her, pulling her back toward the cracked mirror that seemed to pulsate with an eerie light. She turned, compelled to look. But she was met not just with reflections, but opening shadows, dark, significant, drawing closer. The mirror's surface rippled, distorting reality. She could see Jake and Lily, their faces distorted in terror, calling for her through the veil, their pleas slashing through her heart. The door trembled, the presence behind it pressing against the barrier, hungry and relentless. Sarah could feel it, a weight heavier than anything she had known, scraping at her mind, yearning to break free. Panic ignited within her. She wrestled with the decision as icy fingers gripped her heart. Should she push forward, or retreat? As the whispers melded into a single voice, a horrifying thought struck her: what if it was already too late? What had she awakened? What darkness lurked in the depths? Just then, the ground beneath her shook. In a blink, the trunk slammed shut, echoing through the basement like thunder. Sarah staggered back, eyes wide. Before her, the mirror shimmered, reflecting not just her frantic expression, but a looming shadow behind her. Before she could scream, the darkness enveloped her, clawing at her sanity and dragging her closer. The last thing she heard was the echoing clicks of multiple locks snapping shut, one after another, as the house claimed its next victim. As the shadows churned, the final revelation whispered into the stillness, leaving nothing but a lingering dread. You've joined us now. What had she just awakened? And was there any way to bring her children back from the edge of despair? In the suffocating blackness, Sarah sensed a new menace stirring, revealing that her nightmare was just beginning. Sarah's heart raced as the darkness clung to her like a living entity. She felt the cold tendrils creeping up her back, stealing her breath and seeping into every pore. The shadows pulsed, thrumming with a rhythm that matched her frantic heartbeat. She was trapped, ensnared by something that wanted her, needed her. What do you want from me? She shouted, her voice piercing the stillness. The air grew heavy with a silence that felt tangible, pressing in on her from all sides. Then, the whispers returned, slithering through the darkness. They weren't just calling her, they were laughing. Low, mocking chuckles that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. Join us, they breathed, each word wrapping around her throat like a noose. Before she could process the dread pooling in her stomach, her children's faces surged to the forefront of her mind. She couldn't let them down, she had to find a way to break free. She forced her legs to move, her feet feeling like they were wading through heavy fog. The basement felt like a maze, every corner teeming with unseen horrors ready to pounce. Steeling her resolve, she turned back to the cracked mirror, its surface swirling, beckoning. Jake! Lily! She screamed, lunging toward the glass. I'm coming. Hold on. But as she approached, the reflection morphed. The shadows that had held her children were now unrecognizable forms, twisted and matted with anguish. They coalesced, shifting like smoke as if the mirror itself was a gateway to a much darker realm. Fear wrapped tightly around her heart, squeezing tighter with each breath. The air buzzed, thick with a palpable energy. A sound like nails on a chalkboard scraped through the basement, making her cringe. The wall just to her left shimmered, pulsing rhythmically as if it were alive. But it wasn't just the mirror, the very foundations of the house seemed to thrum with an ominous cadence, resonating with something ancient and evil. Desperation ignited a tiny spark of hope. What if the diary held more answers? She raced back to the trunk, flinging it open with trembling hands. The pages fluttered, eager to reveal more dark tales. She dragged out the diary and turned to the last written entry. "They're hungry," it read, the ink still dark and raw. "They won't stop until they've fed." A sharp gasp escaped her lips. Had the children really been taken to sate the house's hunger? Was it greed that drove the malevolence that now trailed her? The ground rumbled again, sending vibrations through her bones, as if the house was aware of her thoughts, reacting to her dread. "Look closer." The voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere, causing her to jump. The whisper came from the wall, now pulsating brighter than before. Swallowing her fear, Sarah pressed her palm against the surface, feeling the vibrations surge through her. The texture beneath her fingers began to shift, softening as if melting into her touch. A deeper darkness began to break through, revealing faint, tortured faces pressed against the wall, their mouths open in silent screams. Gripped by terror, she recoiled, stumbling backward. "No! No!" The house seemed to exhale, a collective sigh that sent chills running through her veins. The shadows coalesced, forming shapes that mirrored her own, a grotesque parlor of silhouettes, all wretched and twisted. They reached out, grasping at her with skeletal fingers while their glossy eyes glinted with malice. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. Tall and imposing, it stared down at her, its features obscured by swirling darkness. A grin twisted its face, wide and filled with sharpened teeth. "Welcome home." Panic surged like fire through her veins as everything around her became chaotic. The walls shuddered and contorted, whispers crescendoed to screams. She realized with icy clarity that this wasn't just her fight. It was a battle for her children, for her own sanity, perhaps for her very soul. As she prepared to fight back, the lights flickered violently, plunging her into brief darkness. In that moment of quiet, she heard her children's voices again, faint yet clear, calling from somewhere deep within the house. "Mom! Help us!" With renewed determination, Sarah steeled herself against the tidal wave of shadows and the grotesque figure before her. But the walls around her crackled with electricity, and she could feel the impending onset of a tremendous storm, both outside and within. "Am I too late?" she whispered to herself as she took a breath, ready to confront the terror one last time. Just then, a door swung open in the darkness, revealing the basement and what lay beyond. Was it freedom, or a new nightmare? The shadows fluttered anxiously, waiting to see her next move. The door creaked ominously, swinging wide to reveal an expanse of shadowy hallway that stretched into the unsettling depths of the house. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the flickering light that struggled against the darkness. An eerie stillness permeated the atmosphere, broken only by the distant echoes of her children's cries. "Mom! Please!" It was Jake's voice, fragile, soaked in fear. Almost instinctively, Sarah stepped forward, drawn into the belly of the beast, though every instinct screamed for her to run. The walls bore down, seemingly melting inward, and the shadows writhed, eager to welcome her. She could feel the air thickening, stifling her breath as she advanced. The whispers intensified, no longer mere taunts but burning accusations. "You should have let us go. You brought us here." They coiled around her, enraged, weaving through the thin barrier between her reality and their hell. Heart pounding, she pressed on, her fingers brushing against the cool, peeling wallpaper, struggling to find purchase. A shiver chased itself down her spine. Emerging from the dark ahead, she spotted the faintest hint of movement, shadows flitting at the edges like a pack of ravenous wolves. "Sarah!" a voice crooned from the gloom. It chilled her to the bone. "Stop!" Turn back, but she pressed on, ignoring the warning. As she stepped further down the hallway, the ground beneath her feet felt softer, almost sponge-like. It was wrong, utterly unnatural. From the corner of her eye, she glimpsed the faces she had seen on the wall before, twisted and agonized, writhing as if trapped in the fabric of the wallpaper. Mouths agape in silent screams, their eyes kindled by despair. Panic seized her throat. No! She swatted at the wall, her fingers clawing frantically. Let them go. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced, forming a mass before her, a swirling vortex of darkness that pulsated with energy. A low growl reverberated from within, like a beast awakening from a long slumber. The room seemed to vibrate with malevolence, unsettling the very air around her. Dare you challenge us? It hissed, its voice a symphony of torment and pleasure. You are too late. They are ours. Her heart sank. Despair poured over her like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. She thought of Jake and Lily, trapped, powerless. Their faces flickered through her mind, their laughter, innocence, it all felt so distant. The darkness was winning, its grip tightening with every fragile breath she took. Join us, the voices beckoned again, now laced with an unnerving sweetness. No. Never. Sarah screamed, defiance igniting within her. She turned her back on the swirling mass, sprinting down the hallway, her legs propelled by sheer terror. The walls trembled as if enraged by her escape, reaching out with fingertips of shadow trying to drag her back into the void. A sudden bright light flashed, illuminating a door at the end of the corridor, a door caked in the same swirling, eerie designs that echoed the haunting faces she had seen. Was this hope or a trap? The desperation in Jake's voice grew louder, more agonizing. Help us. Don't leave us. It cut through the haze, a lifeline she clung to as she hurtled toward the door, reaching for the knob. Would it lead to her children or to annihilation? In that moment, the shadows converged again, a howling wind scattering darkness around Sarah as she grasped the doorknob. The cold metal burned her palm like ice, a frigid reminder of the danger that lurked behind her. With a burst of strength, she yanked it open, and the world shifted. What lay beyond was not what she had imagined. She hesitated, the doorway opening to a dimly lit room, grim and suffused with an unsettling eeriness. Inside, horrible forms flickered at the edges of her vision, always just out of reach. The chill of dread settled in her stomach as she stepped through. The air felt different, charged, alive. Sarah took a deep breath, mental alarms blaring as she crossed the threshold, but the door slammed shut behind her, imprisoning her in a world where shadows danced, and twisted figures loomed where the horror had just begun. That eye in the dim light, something whisper thin slid between her feet. Fear coiled around Sarah's heart. What had she walked into, and what would be the cost of finding her family? Terror awaits, the voice from the shadows murmured, and it never forgets what kind of nightmare had she unleashed. The door's thud echoed ominously, sealing her in a room drenched in dread. Sarah turned to face the shadows consuming the corners, her heart hammering so loud it reverberated in her ears. She'd yet to see what lurked in the murky depths, but she felt its presence. The air was steeped in a heavy silence, rippling with malevolent energy. Suddenly, a low chuckle resonated from the darkest corner. She whipped around, squinting into the gloom, but saw nothing. Her pulse raced, each beat intensifying the dread gripping her. She caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow that twisted and wriggled, beckoning her closer. Mommy! The echoes of her children's voices floated on the stale air, taunting. Desperation drove her forward, her mind a blur of hope and terror. Jake? Lily? She called out, though her voice wavered, barely above a whisper. The shadows seemed to ripple in recognition, swirling in response, thickening into shapes that morphed with every heartbeat. A flicker of light pulsed ahead, revealing an array of grotesque figures flitting just out of reach. They had faces. Distorted, anguished faces. With every inch she moved, the shadows twisted around her legs like constricting serpents, dulling her scream before it even formed. Help us, he whispered, slinking closer. It was Jake's voice. No, it was a mimicry. A false promise that dug deeper into her heart. She recoiled, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but something anchored her there, the sharpness of fear and a desperate need to save her children. The light flickered again, guiding her eyes to an old, cracked mirror mounted on the wall. In its depths, shadowy images formed, revealing glimpses of her children writhing in despair. Tears welled in her eyes, she pressed her palm against the glass, an unyielding barrier that separated her from their cries. Sarah, a different voice surged behind her, feminine and sweet like a serpent's kiss. Join us. Share your pain. With horrified understanding, she turned, dreading what awaited her. A figure emerged from the dark, ethereal, and haunting its eyes glowed with an unholy hunger. It grinned, showing teeth too sharp, too jagged. They belong to the night now, just like you will. No. She gasped, staggering back only to hit the unforgiving wall behind her. The looming figure edged closer, the darkness spilling over it like a cloak. In a flash of instinct, Sarah stumbled toward the mirror. Jake! Lily! She screamed. I'm coming. The mirror vibrated at her touch, sending shockwaves through her body as images distorted flashes of her children's laughter mixed with cries of terror. It was a whirlpool of despair, pulling her in, wanting to swallow her whole. I want to let you take me. She yelled, shoving her palm against the mirror with all her might. The glass trembled, splintering at the edges. The figure lunged but was halted, as if caught in a net of fractured light. Pulling her hand away, the reflection rippled violently. Inside, something stirred. She gasped as two dark hands, familiar yet twisted, reached out toward her. Help us, Mommy. They beckoned, the anguish woven into their voices. The sinister figure shrieked, its form dissipating, only to be replaced by more shadows, each one swirling with malevolent glee. Join us, they hissed, join us in the dark forever. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah seized the moment. Gripping the edges of the mirror, she pounded on the glass, desperate to shatter the barrier. The room rumbled in response, the air frothing with energy. She had to break through. But in that very moment, the floor beneath her cracked open, deep chasms forming like jagged teeth. Waves of darker shadows surged toward her, coiling around her legs, dragging her down into the abyss. Mom! The voice broke through. It was Jake. The panic surged anew, igniting a last desperate resolve. She lunged for the mirror one more time, the fractured surface calling her. This was her chance, but would it shatter, or would it cage her forever? The room roared, shadows howling like ravenous wolves. No escape, the figures rasped, you are ours. As she fell, the images of her children blurred, and a chilling thought slithered into her mind. Had she truly sought to save them, or had she only sealed her own fate? Just when she thought it was over, the light from the mirror pulsed one final time. What if saving them meant losing herself entirely? The mirror exploded with a blinding light, shards of glass flaring like 1,000 stars. Sarah felt a surge of warmth wash over her, as if reality itself was peeling away the layers of darkness. She landed, not in the chasm she feared, but on cold, hard floorboards. Breathless, she scrambled to her feet, scanning her surroundings. Jake! Lily! She shouted, her voice echoing in the space. She was back in the house, her home, but it felt wrong. Familiar yet foreign, memories rippled through her like unwelcome ghosts. A chill crept up her spine, and she realized she was not alone. The air thickened, swarming with tension. Shadows flickered against the walls, alive and darting. Sarah's heart raced as she felt the fear coil in her stomach, knotting tightly. Was this just the beginning of some new horror? Mommy, the voice, sweet yet tortured, drifted from the hallway. It felt strangely inviting, yet so far away. She took a cautious step forward, her breath hitching as she ventured down the dim corridor. The walls felt alive, pulsing with a heartbeat that synchronized with hers. Jake? She called, fear clawing at her throat. Lily? The air shifted. A creak echoed from above, water dripping somewhere behind her. She stopped, straining to hear, but the silence returned, thick and suffocating. Her mind raced. Hadn't she just escaped? Now she was trapped again, this time with no mirror to give her hope. A flicker caught her attention. A shadow slipped under a door at the end of the hallway. That had to be them, her children were in there. She rushed forward, adrenaline coursing through her veins, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. But when she reached for the doorknob, hesitation gripped her. What if it was a trap? What if she truly hadn't escaped at all? The inky darkness shifted again, curling up like a snake, whispering promises of pain and confusion. You didn't save them, it hissed. You only brought yourself here to suffer. No. She shouted, shaking her head. I will find them. She turned the knob and pushed the door open, a crack. The hinges creaked in protest, and the door swung widely on its own, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and she could hear a faint whimpering. Jake? Lily? She called, stepping inside. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in a suffocating void. Shadows closed in, swirling around her like a tornado of despair, and she could feel their malevolence tugging at her. Suddenly, lights flickered overhead, illuminating the room. What Sarah saw made her blood run cold. The walls were plastered with photos of her children, laughter frozen in time. Beneath those joyful smiles were scribbled messages, frantic and desperate. Help us. Save us. It hurts. Her breath caught as she leaned closer. The whimpering intensified. They were in pain, no longer just echoes in the shadows. They were trapped, somehow, in the very walls that encased her. No, 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 she whispered, stepping back, but the shadows surged forward, grasping at her clothes, pulling her toward the photos that mocked her. Was this the price for her failure? To be absorbed into the darkness along with her children? Mommy, save us! The words slithered into her ears, a haunting plea. Her heart shattered. With a fierce resolve, she gripped the edges of the wall, nails digging in. I will find you. She screamed, as the room trembled around her, but the shadows thickened, shrieking in fury. You're too late. They are ours now. A loud crack split the air as the walls around her began to distort, the photos warping grotesquely. Darkness poured in from every angle, threatening to swallow her whole as the voices of her children twisted into laughter filled with despair. Mommy! Join us! Just as the darkness threatened to envelop her, she caught a glimpse of something flickering between the photos, a dull glint of metal, perhaps hope or a way out. Biting back her fear, she lunged towards it, plunging towards the light. But would it be salvation or doom? The moment froze, full of terror and potential. In front of her, destiny awaited. Could she truly save them, or had she stepped into another trap? The glimmer of metal drew Sarah closer, her heart hammering until it drowned out the whispering voices. She reached out, fingers trembling as she grasped it, a fragile key hanging on a tarnished chain. The shadows hissed, their grips tightening on her limbs, the temperature plummeting. Foolish mother, they mocked, a cacophony of desperate laughter. With a surge of panic, Sarah yanked her hand back, clutching the key to her chest. The shadows recoiled, momentarily halted by the force of her action. She gasped, her breath misting in the icy air, and darted her eyes to the walls. The twisted faces of her children looked out at her in torment, pleading. She had to act. Jake! Lily! She called again, her voice fractured with desperation. The shadows writhed around her, as if her words infuriated them. They lunged, trying to drag her down into their abyss, their cold tendrils brushing against her skin. The key felt like fire in her clenched fist. Unlock their prison, the voices echoed from the gloom. They belonged to the darkness, and though part of her screamed to resist, another voice urged her to push through, to fight for her children. The key gleamed ominously in the flickering light above. Unlock what? She shouted, frustration erupting in her voice. What do I need to do? And then she saw it, a small, rusty padlock embedded in the wall, nestled close to the shifting shadows. With a grim resolve, she stepped toward it, the key clattering against her chest like a heartbeat. The ghostly images around her twisted in agony as she approached the lock. The whimpering grew louder, a desperate chorus that pulled at the core of her being. As she knelt and inserted the key, her hand trembled, remembering the warmth of her children's embraces. Everything she cherished clashed violently against the penetrating cold of the room. With a heavy breath, she turned the key. It clicked, a sound of promise and dread. The shadows shrieked, their howls erupting into a monstrous chorus, as the padlock slowly creaked open. The room shuddered. The walls seemed to pulse, alive and angry, and a crack split the surface like a wound. She gripped the edges of the lock, heart racing, as a black mist seeped through the gap. "Mommy!" The voice of her son melted into the air, growing stronger, stretching into a heart-wrenching scream. A whirlwind of memories swirled around her. Moments of joy began flooding back, laughter echoing against the dark. But with them came uneasiness. This was not just about freedom, there was something else hidden in the hazy depths. "Jake! Lily!" she cried, lurching forward, filled with both purpose and horror. The mist swirled violently, revealing blurred shapes, her children, faint echoes stretching towards her, reaching, begging. Each silhouette blinked in and out of existence, distorted faces in the chaos, but then something shifted, the air hung heavy with dread. A new shadow emerged from the dark mist, darker than the others. It formed a grotesque figure, tall and looming, with empty eye sockets and a smile that didn't belong. The laughter twisted, rising into a piercing shriek. "Did you think you could leave?" it taunted, extending long, thin fingers towards her. The very air vibrated with its malice. "They belong to me now." Fear clawed at her throat, but Sarah stood firm, her breath hitching as she recalled the warmth of a hug, the sound of her children's laughter, memories that anchored her. "No!" she shouted, raising the key like a weapon. "You want to take them?" The figure recoiled slightly, uncertainty crossing its featureless face. The mist twisted around her, building like a storm, and Sarah understood then this was a fight for her children's souls, not just an escape. "Help us!" Their whispers melded into one, a haunting plea that filled her heart with strength. The shadows surged forward, but she pushed through, determined. In her grip, the key began to glow, brighter than the darkness itself. Could it truly work? Was this the means to really save them, or would it only accelerate their descent into oblivion? As the room oscillated between light and dark, Sarah braced herself for the confrontation of her life. Either she would free them or be consumed by the very darkness she had fought so desperately to escape. What happens next could change everything, a voice in her mind whispered as the chaos around her twisted, and then she plunged into the abyss, ready to face whatever was waiting. The darkness erupted around Sarah, engulfing her in a cold embrace. It wrapped her tightly, pushing and pulling as if alive and hungry. The laughter morphed into a chorus of screams, agonizing and echoing endlessly in her mind. Memories of her children filled her thoughts, but instead of warmth, they brought her terror. She felt the pressure of the shadows closing in. "Help us!" echoed again, the desperation radiating through her core like a warning bell. The key flickered its light defiantly, illuminating the faces trapped within the walls. "Mommy!" The distorted voices cried out, twisted by the very darkness that now threatened to steal her life. Shadows ripped through the air, whispering secrets, 1,000 tales of despair and loss. One of those secrets whispered that freedom could come at a terrible price. "Focus!" she commanded herself. She still had the key, the very thing that could unlock the chains binding her children to this nightmare. Stepping deeper into the mist, she felt the energy shift. The grotesque figure loomed closer, every inch of its being exuding malevolent power. Its hollow eye sockets seemed to bore straight through her, feeding on her fear. "You should be scared," it hissed, mocking her bravery. "You'll only draw closer to despair." "Shut up!" she screamed, the words bursting forth like a guttural tremor. The shadows recoiled at her defiance, but the laughter continued, now mocking her strength. She raised the key higher, letting its glow transform the icy air into something less suffocating. "You don't control me," Sarah declared, taking a brave step forward. The cold mist shrieked as it narrowed, recoiling from the brilliance of the key. Around her, the walls pulsated. The laughter faded to slivers of sorrow, the faces pleading for release. Tension built in every corner, almost like the room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Free them." The commanding voice slipped through the shifting darkness. Frantic energy surged around her, almost electrifying. The hairs on her arms stood on end. But it wasn't just emotion, it was an awakening. With all her might, Sarah lunged for the crack, shoving the key towards the shadow-cloaked figure. "I'll save them," she shouted, feeling the raw power radiate through her fingertips. But the figure only laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through her very bones. "You think you can break my chains?" it bellowed. The laughter echoed off the walls, weaving through the shadows, feeding into the darkness that seemed insatiable. "You leave me no choice, then," Sarah hissed, digging deep into her own memories. Images of laughter, joy, and love flared brightly behind her eyes, overpowering the dread that lingered. "I want to lose them." In that moment, the key blazed to life, casting a searing light that pierced through the shadows. It expanded, pushing the darkness back, cascading energy that felt alive, a force not just meant to unlock, but to obliterate the very essence of despair. The air split with a scream unlike any she had heard before, the figure contorting as if caught in a violent storm. "No! You will pay for this!" Watched it gnarled, twisting into shapes that made her stomach churn. "Stay away from them." With every ounce of courage, Sarah pushed herself forward, the key guiding her through the veil of shadows. It felt as if she was breaking through unseen barriers, shattering the binds that tethered her family to this nightmare. The light around her pulsed. Each beat resonated with a deep yearning, a promise of reunion. But just as she felt the mist begin to yield, a searing pain throbbed in her chest. Fingers cold as ice gripped her heart, squeezing tightly. The shadows were not finished with her yet, time hung like a fragile thread. The figure screeched, contorting as tendrils of darkness wrapped around Sarah, pulling her backward. Her voice, filled with fury and pain, split the air. "Jake! Lily!" The light flickered, and an explosion of sound erupted as shadows erupted in mad chaos. "What is this?" The figure howled, disorientation echoing. "You can fight me forever." But she didn't need to fight forever. Just long enough to break through. "Mommy!" Buried in the cacophony was that voice again, more haunting than any shadow. Sarah reached deep, searching for the strength she'd forgotten in the darkness. Could the key alone save her family? Or was this battle just the beginning of something far worse? The mist grew unbearable. Then a rift tore open in the shadows, revealing a path illuminated by warm, golden light. Without another thought, she sprinted toward the light. But just as she took her first step, the shadows roared around her, grasping for her limbs, determined to pull her back. "Sarah!" The cries of her children grew frantic, but she wouldn't turn back, no matter the cost. But as the shadows clawed at her, she realized the truth. What if the light wasn't the way out? What if it was a trap? Her heart raced as she plunged forward, racing against the shuddering void behind her. Would the darkness swallow her whole, or was there still a chance to save her children? As the light reached out to envelop her, one thought screamed in her mind: what terrible secrets waited in the depths of that golden glow? The blinding light enveloped Sarah, its warm glow reaching out like comforting arms. She felt weightless, suspended in a moment that felt both fragile and eternal. The shadows shrieked behind her, clawing at her resolve, their anguished cries piercing through the golden haze. "You can't escape!" they shouted, anger twisting their voices into a dissonance that rattled her bones. But amidst the chaos, she saw them, Jake and Lily, silhouettes shimmering at the heart of the light. Their faces looked soft, almost ethereal, yet so unmistakably familiar. "Mommy." Jake's voice reached her, trembling yet full of hope. It sliced through her fear, propelling her forward with undeniable urgency. "Don't worry. I'm coming," she shouted, her heart swelling with love as she surged toward them. Each stride felt like breaking through thick glass, the shadow's grasp weakened with every step she took into the light. The air buzzed around her, crackling with the turbulent energy of love versus despair. When she reached the edge of the light, there was no denying the pull of her children. The golden warmth cascaded around them, wrapping them in a prism of safety. But there was an unsettling shift in the shadows, they writhed in agitation. "Join us!" they echoed, voices intertwining in a sinister chorus. In that moment, Sarah understood these shadows were the remnants of a despairing fate, fragments of the souls they had trapped. "No!" she cried, voice resolute, pushing into the light further. As if sensing her newfound strength, the shadows reared back, transforming into monstrous forms that loomed larger, bolder. They lashed out, black tendrils reaching for her, desperate to pull her under. But she would not falter, her children were worth the fight. The light intensified, pulling her closer to Jake and Lily, who were now outstretching their arms, their faces twisted in longing and a touch of fear. "Mommy!" they cried again, and with that, she forced herself through the last barrier that separated them. The moment Sarah crossed into the light, something extraordinary happened. The shadows recoiled as if struck, screeching in defeat and flailing as they dissolved into nothingness. The air shimmered in the aftermath, leaving a silence that felt like soft reassurance. Sarah felt herself falling, but it was different this time. There were no icy fingers grasping at her spirit, she was free. "Tighter, Mommy." Lily beamed, now standing beside her. In that instant, Sarah pulled her children into an embrace, the warmth of their bodies igniting a fire in her heart. She could feel their small hearts beating beneath her hands, and a sense of relief washed over her. It was as if the darkness had never existed, yet the dim memories of dread still drummed in the recesses of her mind. "Are we safe now?" Jake asked, his innocent gaze piercing through the remnants of fear that lingered. "Yes, my loves," she replied, her voice breaking at the edges with unshed tears. "We're safe." As they began to turn, the golden light opened up into a familiar sight. The mundane living room of their Maple Brook home welcomed them with open arms, faded walls that whispered secrets of yesterday. Sarah held her breath, half expecting to see shadows dance in the corners, but the room was as it should be, still, quiet, peaceful. But then she noticed something else, walls now devoid of despair and trapped faces. The haunted past that had held her hostage dissolved into the light, leaving behind merely a home filled with the sound of her children's laughter. "Can we go play outside?" Lily chimed, her eyes sparkling as she tugged on Sarah's hand. That simple query, laced with pure joy, filled infinity with meaning. Each moment thrummed with the realization that they had conquered not only the shadows, but the very essence of fear. "Yes. Let us go." Sarah laughed, heart brimming with gratitude. They sprinted through the doorway, each step a promise of new memories to be made, free from the horrors that once loomed. Outside, the sun bathed the world in warmth, the air crisp but inviting. It was a fresh start anew. Story yet to unfold. As Sarah watched Jake and Lily race into the swaying grass, the shadows were nothing but a distant memory resting far behind in the cobwebbed halls of the past. She felt a weight lifted not just from her shoulders but from her very soul. They were finally free. Everything was as it should be, and she knew in her heart that love overpowers darkness. As Sarah called out to her children, their laughter rang through the air like a melody, weaving hope across Maple Brook. This was home where stories whispered, but none could wound them again. Thank you for joining this journey through the shadows and light. You need to subscribe now, so you don't miss more exclusive stories like this one. Smash that like button now to help feed the algorithm and spread the word. I want to hear your reactions. Flood the comments section with all your thoughts and theories about what happens next. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support means the world.